I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with Eli Horowitz, and this is the WNBA Insider Show. Each week, we cover various topics in the league using honest and critical analysis in a way that nobody else does. Welcome to the Insider. Eli, this is an emergency podcast. Some crazy stuff has gone on. Uconn lost in the Final Four for the second consecutive season, which is mind-boggling with the amount of talent they have. And moving forward, I think the most important thing that we've really heard is that, and I might be butchering the name, so apologize if I am, but Azura Stevens will be skipping her final year and will be entering the WNBA draft. So I think that's a really exciting thing that we really need to talk about. Eli, how do you think that affects the upcoming draft as far as, you know, the scheme of the first couple picks? And if you were a team, I mean, we're going to get deep, but...
Well, first of all, I'm blown away by this news. This is huge. And I'm not trying to be sensationalist. Like, this completely changes the first round. Completely. She could go, and I am not being hyperbolic here. She could be the first pick. She could. I'm not saying she will be, but when you ask me how could this affect it, she could go as high as 1. I would not be stunned. Now, that might be because Vegas makes a trade, but she could go 1, 2, and I'd be absolutely stunned if she got past Chicago. So I'd still, right now, less than 24 hours since the news dropped, I still believe A'ja Wilson will go 1. If you have, if I'm putting percentages on it, if I'm a betting man, but I will say I would be stunned if she gets past Chicago, which means she's going top 3.
So let's dive a little deeper into that. So we're looking at the teams that have the top 3 picks, all right? Well, or you could say top 4, and even though that doesn't really matter because Chicago has 3 and 4. But Vegas. Now, let's start with looking at Vegas. A'ja Wilson, someone who has been the considered consensus first pick of the draft for a while now. Why do you think that Stevens might be a better fit or might be likely to go? Because you're not just talking about Stevens has the skill set to be the number 1 pick. Or correct me if I'm wrong. But what you're saying is that Stevens has that ceiling and that Stevens very well could fit better into certain positions that A'ja doesn't.
Yeah, let me give you my scouting report on Stevens first, because I think that's important to understand why, we're so high on her. First of all, she's 6'6", and believe it or not, that's taller than A'ja Wilson. She can shoot the 3. Her percentages at Uconn this year weren't anything to write home about, but if you look at the form she has and you watch her videos at USA Basketball Camp, she can shoot the 3. She's extremely aggressive on the glass and on defense. She can guard definitely 3s and 4s comfortably, and she's certainly tall enough to guard 5s and athletic enough if she has to switch out even on some 2s, and that's just switching briefly on a possession. And she is just so athletic, and usually, you know what I mean. Usually there are players where you're like, man, this player has a lot of finesse, but they might be a little soft, or man, this player is a brick house, but they lack some touch and finesse. She has both. And that is why I feel like she might have the highest ceiling of anyone in this draft.
Wow. And I'm not trying to, again, we're not trying to sensationalize that. I respect your opinion on this, but that can be shattering for other teams. I mean, moving on down, if you think about that, okay, there's been a lot of talk of whether or not Bill Embiid, or as some people will call him, Trader Bill, is going to try and trade this first pick. Now, he has a lot more value in that possible trade. If that was true that he wanted to do that, if you're Bill Embiid, are you now shopping that pick?
Well, you're always shopping, in my opinion, right? Like, to come out and say we're taking A'ja Wilson, then you have no leverage. So you definitely got to shop the pick. But I got to be honest, and I want your opinion because, I mean, this is, man, I mean, for Chicago, it's a no-brainer. And like I said, 3 and on, if Stevens is there, you take her. But for Indy and Vegas, man, they have impossible choices to make. Asia Wilson just fits what Vegas needs. They need a face of the franchise. Asia Wilson's dominant, a great player, can play the 4 and the 5, is perfect for the rebuild, but you're sitting there singing, man, Stevens is 6'6" and might have a higher ceiling. Then let's say Vegas does take Wilson. Now Indy's sitting there saying, man, we were going to take Kelsey Mitchell. She's a guard. We need a scoring guard. She could be the face of our franchise. But man, Stevens might have a higher ceiling. So you have one of these situations where do you take the right fit or do you just take the better prospect?
Well, and that's where I think a lot of team positioning comes in, right? If you're Indiana, and we've talked about this a lot, I think Indiana by far is in the toughest position of the first round. Indiana is in a spot where they traded away their starting point guard. They basically said with one of our first picks in the first round, we are going to get the point guard of the future. Or they're planning on doing some like unheralded trade in the draft days, right? So to me, Indy's the one who is kind of secured in the toughest position in the game. If I'm Vegas, I looked at it like this, and we talked about this. Asia Wilson's somebody who I think is a cornerstone of a team. That's who Asia Wilson is. Is Stevens also a cornerstone of the team as far as, being a face of the franchise, being someone who is going to, for years and years, be that person that you associate with the team? I don't necessarily know. Do I agree with you that Stevens might have a higher ceiling or does have a higher ceiling? Yeah.
And that's the problem because you're completely right. Asia Wilson just fits the bill as the number 1 pick. The problem is I don't think Bill Laimbeer is someone who really cares about that. I think Bill Laimbeer, if he feels Stevens will be the better pro, that's who he's going to select. Look, Asia Wilson won a national title. She's been like she's the AP Player of the Year for college this year in 2018. But again, Bill Laimbeer is not someone to sit there and say who had more accolades in college. He's someone to sit there and say who is going to be the better pro. And there's just something in my gut that says Stevens kind of has that slightly higher ceiling. Now, I'm almost at a loss for words. Like, what would you do if you're Bill Laimbeer?
If I'm Bill Laimbeer, to me, I'm thinking I honestly throw a whole clog in the wrench. All right, I mean, let's put it this way. There's 2 camps of thought. Either Bill was legitimately thinking about shopping the first round pick because he wasn't that sold on Asia. If that's true, I don't think there's a question. I think he quote unquote shocks the world and goes with Stevens, right? But think about this though. Like, does she legitimately? Again, there's just so many elements that could go into this. There's no guarantee. There's at least the guarantee that we thought we had, 3 days ago for Asia going number 1. That shit's out the window. Excuse my language.
Right. So, okay, let's put it this way. Let me be a little more decisive in my words. There's 2 teams that have 2 first-round picks, Chicago and Indiana. It's going to be hard for them to trade with other teams the first pick, right? Because if you're going to trade the first pick, you're going to want 2 first-round picks, right? So let's look at each team. Chicago. Now, we've talked about this. Let's say he offers Chicago picks 3 and 4. I don't think Chicago would do that. There's just, especially with Stevens in the mix, there's way too much talent now. You'd rather have picks 3 and 4. Now, what I do think Laimbeer should do is offer the first pick to Pokey Chapman in exchange for picks 2 and 8. And say, take the first pick, you get Asia Wilson, Pokey. And Indiana would have to at least think about that because they're
honestly, no. Think about it, but no. If I'm Pokey and Bill comes to me and says, hey, I got the first pick, you can move up 1 spot and give me 1 and 8, I'm Pokey and I laugh at him, right? Because think about it this way. I know what you're getting at, which is that Indiana's in a tough position, but think about it this way. they don't have to make the tough decision, right? Vegas goes and Vegas says, all right, we're going Wilson. Then Fever obviously are in a tough position because then they have the same question that everyone else in the draft has, which is, do we go Stevens over who we had already basically decided was going to be, the next person on our team, right?
Yeah.
So to me, if Indy gets that offer, you kind of scoff at them and you say, come back with something better.
Yeah, I mean, no, but right. I agree with you. I'm not doing that trade if I'm Indiana. What I'm saying to you is if I'm Bill Laimbeer, I'm trying to convince Indiana to give me the 2nd and 8th pick for the 1st pick. That's what my move would be. I don't think Chicago would, obviously you can, because that's the thing. Like if Bill tried to trade the pick for 3 and 4 to Chicago, he might not get Stevens then. And I think he definitely wants Stevens or Wilson. He wants a big. So the risk is if he got picks 3 and 4, then Chicago moves up and takes A'ja Wilson and Indy takes Stevens. He's stuck with some of these guards he probably doesn't even want. So I think Bill.
Yeah, but I mean, he could get, but answer me this. All right. And this is something that I want to get into also, which is, all right, we've been talking for the past 10 minutes or so about the first 4 picks. Well, the first 3 teams in this draft, all right? Vegas, Fever, Sky. Now, I agree with you. Let's work off some assumption that Vegas moves a little bit, just for a little bit, and Vegas moves to 3 and 4 with the Sky. Gabby Williams and Diamond DeShields? Or, Jordan Canada? I guess that doesn't fit for Vegas, so they'd be more looking for some bigs. Williams.
I just feel like with McBride and Plum on the perimeter, he's going to want to build off a scoring for Wilson or Stevens. I'm very confident in that. So I don't even want to waste my time. Chicago and Vegas, I don't think that trade happens. I give that less than a 5% chance.
Okay.
I think the better chance of Bill getting that pick moved is with Indiana. I agree with you. I don't think Indiana should do it. I think he has a better chance convincing Pokey Chapman of saying, hey, give me the 2nd and 8th pick, because what he could do is try to talk Pokey into this notion of, hey, you guys are probably the worst team in the league. You're rebuilding. I'm giving you a chance to get A'ja Wilson and completely change your organization. And then if he trades back and then has picks 2 and 8, he can get Stevens at 2, which would be perfect for him to play the 4. And then at 8, he can, fill in where he needs to fill in at that point. That's what I think he's going to try to do.
I hope.
Now, if he can't get a trade, honestly, whether he takes Wilson or Stevens, I think it's wide open. And call it a hot take, but that's where I feel.
All right, so I think, we can only work off assumptions so far. Let's kind of keep it going. 1 and 2, let's assume, sorry guys, but let's assume Wilson goes to Fever, or Wilson goes to Aces. Now, Indiana Fever's sitting there. Do you go Mitchell or Stevens? I talked about this a few seconds ago. They traded away their starting point guard. They kind of if there's anybody in the league in the first round who kind of has given the teleprompter away of what they're planning to do in the first round, it's Indy, right?
Right. So there's 2 ways they could go about it other than trading. If they hold serve, which I think they should, especially now that there are 9 to 10 impact players in this draft and they could get 2 of them, they have 2 options. They could just go ahead and take Mitchell and pass on Stevens and then kind of do what we've been saying before. With the 8th pick, they have probably a pretty good chance of taking Maria Vadiva. So they'd get their big in Vadiva, and they'd get their guard in Mitchell. And I think that's their most secure path to getting the 2 positions they need. Having said that, we've discussed ad nauseum that Mitchell and Vadiva are both question marks in their own right. So if they wanted to flip their strategy, it could be, okay, we traded for Alexander as a 5. Let's take Stevens at 2. She's a potentially franchise-altering 4. And then we got to just pray that Lexi Brown will now fall to 8 because of the impact Stevens has being in this draft. and then maybe they get Stevens and Lexi Brown, and then they still get a point guard and a big. So I don't know. Yeah, and I've been thinking about that all day. Which of those two scenarios do you think is better for Indy if it played out that way? Getting Mitchell and Vadiva as planned, or kind of going the opposite approach of taking Stevens and then hoping they can somehow still get Lexi Brown at 8?
I think you got to hope for Lexi Brown at 8. Something I really wanted to that's been rattling in my brain all day also is been, we've talked about this almost to an overly overextent. There was 8 to 9 top talents in this draft class, right? And now you add one more, and there's been a couple other people. Like, don't forget, there's been some other players who have committed to this draft, but none of them affect the first round like Stevens does. And with Stevens coming in, what that's going to do is that's going to bump other people down, and we'll get into the effects of that later on. And I think we got to get into like regrading the trade between Indy, Minnesota, and Phoenix, because I think this announcement of Stevens joining the draft completely changes that. But something that's so interesting, if I'm Indy,
wait, but to clarify, you're saying you would take Stevens then?
Oh yeah,
if you were Indy.
Oh yeah, if I'm Indy, because here's the thing, if I'm Indy, and this is my personal take, I'm not going to say that this is something that's 100% backed by stats or blah blah blah. Just watching them, Kelsey Mitchell, amazing talent, amazing skill. Jordan Canada blew me away. To me, the top guards in the draft are Canada and Brown, and then Mitchell. And that might be a hot take or whatever you want to call it. Jordan Canada blew me away playing against top talents with her speed, her focus, and her vision. All right. Lexi Brown was someone who showed me that she was a complete point guard. She's not the greatest at every single detail, but she's a complete point guard. Kelsey Mitchell, the question marks that I have of her having the ability to do a little bit more are still in my head, and whether or not, factual things are going to back my opinion. My opinion is that she's the third best out of all three of those. So if I'm Indy, I'm going Stevens, and you're hoping that, most likely Canada ain't falling that far, and Kelsey Mitchell probably also. But I'm hoping one of those 3 point guards falls to 8, and I don't think that's crazy at all if you look at the...
I agree with you. I think, look, Indiana is not one piece away from winning. They're not one Kelsey Mitchell away from winning. They are 2 to 3 to even 4 pieces away from winning. So I just think you have to take the best available when you're rebuilding. I think Stevens is that high of a prospect that you just have to take her there. And then, like you said, you hope that Lexi Brown or another point guard still available. And honestly, if they're not, that's okay, because they're probably going to be right back there next year. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
In the lottery. So, maybe next year they get Asia Durr, right? Or another elite point guard. Like, you're not going to suddenly go from the worst team in the league to a contender in one draft. So I think they need to be a little bit more focused on taking the best player available instead of Kelsey Mitchell.
Exactly. And think about it this way, all right? You stay with the normal picks that we got right now, okay? So Fever at 2 and then Fever again at 8. I'm just looking at it with Stevens in there also, and you picking Stevens. So then, all right, I'm not gonna lie. I'm looking at right now, W Basketball blog by Anila. All right, I'm looking at this right now, and this is.
By the way, shout out.
Yeah,
that's a
big shout out.
You know us. We give critical and honest analysis, positive or negative, and she does a great job with these mock drafts, man. I read the last one, and I was like, she convinced me, because we didn't have Gulic in ours, and I'll give her credit. She changed my mind, and I put her into mine. So, she does a great job with that.
Respect where respect is due, and I've spoken to her a few times, and she puts in a lot of hard work, and we have a lot of respect for her. But so back to this, I'm looking at her. She just put out a brand new projected draft for the first round, second round, and third, I think. I'm just looking at it, and someone that I've been high up on this whole tournament has been Kia Nurse. All right, so let's just assume that Lexi Brown, Jordan Canada, and Kelsey Mitchell all go by pick 8. Just numbers-wise, that means that Kia Nurse is still around, all right? That means that Diamond DeShields or Victoria Vivians is probably still around. And, so there's no way that Kelsey Mitchell, Jordan Canada, Gabby Williams, Vivians, and Lexi Brown, and DeShields are all gone, and Nurse are all gone by 8, right? So you're still like, that's why, again, back to the trade. This announcement of Stevens coming in here changes the whole aspect of it, and to me, drops the Minnesota Lynx draft or trade grade even lower than it was before. And I've already been critical of it. But now you're talking about a situation where the number 12 pick is the 1 to 2 player who is just out of that cusp of being an elite talent in this draft. So, you might be able to convince me that there's only 9 and 10 top talents and the 12th pick really isn't worth that much. So like, it wasn't that bad of a trade, but convince me now that we have, 10 top talents. And then you're going to tell me what, there's not 3 players out there who are arguably worth going in the first round. Come on.
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's a good point. And nobody's talking about that today on Twitter. And I knew you were going to bring it up. And it's an excellent point, is the losers of all this are the teams that traded out their picks, right? Like you said, the Lynx, yeah, they would have had the 12th pick. But look, the 12th pick now could be Gulic, it could be Mavunga, it could be Billings. Those are bigs that could be rotation level players, and they lost their bigs this offseason. Look at the 8th pick. We were critical of Phoenix, and I've kind of come around on that trade a little bit more. I think by the end of my reporting, I was a little convinced that it was worth them trading the 8th pick for January, just because they are in a win now mode. Because think about it, they traded for a starter in January, whereas Minnesota traded for a backup in Robinson. But having said that, like that 8th pick now, like that, that's going to be a Lexi Brown or a Vivian's. So that trade, like you said, those grades go a little bit down, and Indy is a big winner in all this because, like we said, now they can take Stevens and still get a very good guard, whether it be Brown or Nurse, with that 8th pick. And maybe they still, honestly, maybe you still take Fadiva if you're Indy. Like I said, I don't think they have to take a point guard because I just don't think you can address your rebuild in one draft. I think you just take the best players you possibly can. They're probably going to be in the lottery next year too. And then at that point, they can fill in the gaps that they need. But Stevens is too high a ceiling. I think, again, I went into this pod, I posted a mock earlier today, and I had Mitchell staying at 2 and Stevens going 3. And partially that's just because Stevens would be such a perfect fit in Chicago as a stretch 4. But the more we talk, I just really feel like Indy's got to take Stevens if she's there.
Do you think – okay, and I'm just going to throw this out there. I think it's kind of crazy even in my own mind. What about Chicago trying to move up a little?
Okay, yeah, I wanted to talk about Chicago. Before we talk about them moving up, though, I want to just finish this exercise. And we're not going to go through the whole first round. Let's just go through Chicago. So I think we said we still feel like Wilson goes 1, even though it's close, and Lambier will definitely might try to make a trade. I think we both agree that it's really tough, but Indy should go with Stevens too. So then let me ask you, and looking at Anila's mock draft, she has then Chicago taking Kelsey Mitchell and Gabby Williams. But I don't think Chicago wants Kelsey Mitchell. They have a point guard in Vandersloot. They have a shooting guard in Quigley. They love those players. Probably, I think they kind of overrate them, if you ask me. But that's our opinion. But they need wings, right? They need wings. And so I ask you, who should they take if Wilson and Stevens go 1 and 2? Because there's so many directions they could go in at that point.
So I haven't voiced, and to be completely fair, I haven't voiced this opinion out loud. It was just something that kind of popped into my head. Victoria Vivians. What about Gabby and Victoria?
I mean, that would give them some really good length. And then you'd have Gabby, who's a little bit more of a, defensive-minded player, and Vivian's a little bit more of an offensive-minded player. But again, I don't think they want Mitchell or Vivians.
Really?
Just from my reporting, I just get a sense they're not feeling those players. So
who do you think is the right fit to them? What, Diamond?
I think I think they would probably go with Diamond DeShields and Gabby Williams, which is kind of what they had before, right? That's kind of what they had before. And I think that's what they want. I think they look at Gabby as just such that stretch for elite athlete, and Diamond is someone who can play alongside of Vandersloot, play alongside of Quigley, but who also could handle the ball if she needed to. So I would say Wilson goes 1, Stevens goes 2, and Chicago sticks with their original plan of going Gabby and Diamond. But the one wrinkle I wanted to throw out is the idea that they could take Canada and dangle her to Seattle and Dallas, who we both know want a point guard.
So expanding on that, here's my question for you on that. If they do that, who do you think? I mean, I guess to me, it's if you are in this position, you're a GM or you're the head coach or whatever, you're the one who is given the position of power for this. You're sitting there and you're saying, all right, we have 3 and 4. One of these players who is out there is somebody who we have ID'd as we need for our team, right? If you're a top 3 pick, you know that there is somebody who you need for your team to grow. So if I'm Chicago, I'm thinking I have these 2 picks. I'm going to use one of them to get the player I know everyone wants, kind of what you're saying, and dangle them, and then the other player that I want.
Right.
So to me, who do you think is that player for Chicago, I guess, is my first question before I start even thinking about it. Because I don't think there is a player who necessarily stands out in this draft and screams Chicago Sky.
I think they want Diamond DeShields. I think they recognize that even though she has some locker room questions, her ceiling is as high as it gets. Like Asia Wilson, Stevens, and DeShields, those 3 have, in my opinion, like just athletically the highest ceiling in the draft. And I think Chicago is just willing to take the risk of the locker room stuff to get DeShields. And then, like we said, they could either be conservative and take Gabby Williams or take Canada and kind of see if they can trade her to one of these teams that desperately needs a point guard. And then they can, have that team select Gabby Williams for them.
Well, so that was kind of something interesting that I wanted to talk about. I know we're already kind of running over, but I wanted to talk about this. Seattle and Dallas. We had talked a lot about Seattle and Dallas possibly wanting to make some motion in this draft, right? Trying to make some moves, possibly get Jordan Canada. What do you think that this does to that? Do you think now that they're kind of more reserved about possibly trading, saying, oh, if Mitchell goes early and if Chicago really wants DeShields, then we're in a situation where we can grab Gabby Williams or Jordan Canada, or Victoria Vivian's to Dallas, which I was big on.
That's a good point, because they might be sitting there now saying, well, we were going to trade up for Canada, but hey, if we can get Gabby Williams without even having to trade up, or if we can get Diamond DeShields without even having to trade up, we'll just do that and not give up something extra. So yeah, it kind of it's weird. It almost gives them a little bit more leverage because there's more good players in the draft. So they're not as desperate to move up. Does that make sense?
No, 100% makes sense. I think, and again, we had been talking about those were 2 teams to keep your eyes on that they might want to move. And then you're looking at a team like Washington, who, shameless plug, we had Blake on a couple last week, right? And his wife's was the head coach for Vivian's, and his father-in-law is projected to be the head coach for Vivian's in pro. So, are they sitting there now? They're going, oh, this is awesome. We have our eyes on Vivian's. We thought maybe, there might be a small chance after her great tournament that she might be going earlier, and we would have to, analyze some other people. But now, I just think the strength for the later picks in the draft just got up higher, and now you can't have a situation where Chicago or even Chicago and Indy, I think, lost a lot of footing as far as what the value they had for holding a trade.
Yeah, because Seattle might sit there now and say, okay, we don't even need to trade up for Canada because Chicago doesn't want a point guard. So if Chicago takes Gabby Williams and Diamond Shields, man, we might just get Canada anyways. And then Dallas, I mean, wow. I mean, think about that. Kelsey Mitchell and Jordan Canada could be available at 5.
That's insane.
Because if Indy and Las Vegas take Wilson and Stevens, and then Chicago sticks with their plan of DeShields and Gabby, now Seattle and Dallas, they're going to get Mitchell and Canada in some order without having to make any trades.
And then, I mean, I can't imagine Washington going for Lexi Brown, so then we're in the situation we talked about earlier. Indy gets Lexi Brown, Kia Nurse is still around, and Connecticut's, jumping for joy. The Sun are saying, hey, a lot of projected drafts said Kia was going to Connecticut. So now Connecticut's standing there dancing all over the place. So to me, this gives so much more. Everybody who did well last season is kind of just sitting back and going, awesome. Unless, of course, you're the Lynx. In which case you're saying, crap, why do we do that trade?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Anila's mock, and I mean, Maria Vadiva could go 10th to New York, and as much as some people might laugh, a lot of people, a few months ago, people thought she could be the second pick in this draft. And she might fall all the way to 10. So you could be picking 10th in this draft and getting a player in Vadiva that, if she hits her ceiling, could be an all-star.
Well, and
then the Sparks are sitting there saying, "Man, we get Monique Billings."
Exactly.
Easy.
And then the Mercury go, we get Gulich, but even beyond that,
and they need a backup center. So
exactly.
I don't know. It's weird. It in some ways, like you said, everyone's a winner except for teams that traded their picks.
And then even beyond that, looking at the second round, all right. Mavunga, someone who was projected to go first round. Now she's bumped out to the second. All right. Mercedes Russell. I saw a lot of positive feedback on her. A lot of people seeing her stock rise. She wasn't necessarily a high pick in the first round or anything like that, but she was someone who people said could move from the second round to, the 10 through 12 spot of the first round. She's more secured in the second round. Atkins, also more secured in the second round. This has ripple effects that are going to affect far beyond things that, the casual WNBA fan is going to understand.
Now, I have one more question for you. Now, this mock draft has Kelsey Mitchell to Chicago. Now, I think both of us kind of felt like, they don't really want her or need her, but I'm starting to probably understand why she put her there. Is for the same reason we said Stevens, Indiana should just go ahead and take Stevens because of the high-end ceiling. I mean, as much as we've poked at the game of Mitchell, we do know that as least as a scorer, she has the highest ceiling of any of the point guards. So, I mean, should Chicago just be like, you know what, it's not the perfect puzzle piece, but you have to take the best talent. And again, what Chicago benefits from is they can take a player they don't necessarily want, but they know another team wants. So I feel like it might be tough for them to pass on Mitchell, and that's why I think this mock makes a good point of putting her 3. Let's finish there, because I feel like we kind of just assumed, Chicago will pass over Mitchell because they don't want a point guard, but I don't know. What do you think about that?
To me, I think by the time we get to 5, it's gonna be very telling as to what Chicago knows about the rest of the league. All right, we've talked about this a lot. Coaches, GMs feeling out other GMs and coaches to understand what their stance is on things. If I'm Chicago, all right, you should already be in communication with Seattle, Dallas, and Washington, and Indy and Vegas. Just to say, hey, if you wanted to trade, what would it be? What would you need? Right? Just to get the conversation rolling. And to me, it's going to be very telling. If Chicago takes Kelsey Mitchell, and this isn't me hating on her, this is me saying if Chicago takes Kelsey Mitchell, it's much more them saying, we know that other teams are interested in her, and we know that it isn't a BS interest, right? Because they could very easily take someone like Jordan Canada, who a lot of people are standing up and saying, that's who I want, that's who I need, right? Like, that was the person people were trading up for. Nobody was necessarily talking about trading up to get Mitchell. So to me, Chicago's move is going to be kind of a tell for what their insight is for the rest of the league. If Chicago takes Mitchell, honestly, I'd be shocked unless there's a trade that happens soon after. And real quickly, just so our fans know, it is like often in other leagues, teams will trade and retrade during the draft. More common in the W is drafting and then doing a post-draft trade, just so people know.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine, like, if Kelsey Mitchell was considered pretty much she was agreed upon by every mock we've seen and all our sources to be the consensus number 2 pick. Fair enough to say, right?
Definitely.
So even if we don't, like, I know you said you may not be the biggest fan of her game, but I think we can agree for the sake of conversation, she was considered the consensus number 2 pick. So if Stevens goes 2, I mean, it seems like Chicago would, it just seems like it would be tough not to take her 3 or 4, if for nothing else, the leverage of a trade. It's just, I don't know, how could she drop more than 2 slots if she was considered the consensus number 2?
Yeah, but I think, so much of goes into it as, it's the balancing act of what fits my team and who's the top talent. We argue about this all the time, off air, on air, and this happens in every league. When you're drafting, do you go with the best player on the board, or do you go with the player who fits your team the best? For Chicago, at 3 and 4, in all honesty, I think you have the ability to say we're gonna take that one player that by far, fits us the best, and then you take another pick for the top talent, and then you kind of shop them around. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I just don't see Kelsey Mitchell wearing a Sky uniform this year.
So I think we're kind of in agreement, right? It's like Chicago needs to just take one play, use one of those picks to take someone they 100% want and need on their roster, and use the other pick to take the best player available with the intentions of making a trade.
I want to ask you this real quick. With Chicago, and this can kind of be our last thing, I want your take on this. With Chicago and all of the possibilities they have, let's be slightly realistic. Chicago's not going to be making a trade. Nobody's going to be trading Kelsey Mitchell for a current All-Star, right? You're not getting none of these trades we're talking about is going to be, a face of a franchise moving on draft day, or a veteran who's been with the team for a really long time and is a fan favorite moving. So to me, this is why I wouldn't be surprised if Chicago didn't go Mitchell. If Chicago went and just said, you know what, we're big on Gabby Williams and we're big on DeShields, or, we're big on this person and we're big on this person, so we're just going to draft them and sit back and be happy. Because at the end of the day, I think out of everybody, Chicago still, after this move by Stevens declaring, is still in the best position in the draft.
Yeah, it's just hard for me to imagine now you're saying Kelsey Mitchell would go 5th, which is just crazy to think. Earlier this morning, she was the consensus number 2, and you're saying there's a scenario where she drops all the way to 5.
Well, exactly, and that's the thing, that's how crazy it's gotten. That's, to me, why it's so wild. Like, this doesn't happen. You don't have somebody, a week before the draft saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to go into the draft. That completely shifts the makeup. And not to shamelessly plug us, but we will be talking about somebody in our next show, or in our next segment, Renee Montgomery, who is somebody who I'm really interested to see her take on how she affects the makeup of this league, the takes of this league, going from a top tier contender to a team that many are saying now is a top contender.
Yeah, I'm really excited for our conversation with her. I mean, I love covering this draft stuff. It's fun because of the trades and the all the possibilities. But at the end of the day, these are college players, and that's not our forte. So excited to dive back into kind of the current pros and because these players in this draft are going to impact the pros, but that's more in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. And so I'm excited to jump back and have that conversation with Renee because Atlanta could really, be a dark horse this year.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited too. It'll be a fun little chat, and it'll be fun to really see what's going to happen. I know we got some exciting news coming around draft day, so stay tuned, folks. That's all for us this week, or for this episode. That's all for this episode of the WNBA Insider Show. I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with Eli Horowitz.